I'm live. I'm live. Cool. But since I'm live, I still got to fool with this again to make sure that everything's clear. Perfect. Okay, so cells. I want to do this a couple of ways. We ready? All will be revealed. I'll focus it with my mind. Check it out. Don't. This is the least exciting YouTube video ever, and believe me, I've seen a lot of YouTube videos. There we go. Perfect. There are two kinds. We have our prokaryotes.
So some students got caught up in an accident.
Oh no! Are they involved in it, or are they?
But like they, yeah, it looks pretty bad.
Oof, where at?
Good question.
So like they're
There's smoke, like a lot of it.
they're like behind it. They're not in it.
Yeah, they're behind it.
Okay. They just sell. Goodness me.
Yeah, it looks like 195.
Oh dear. Hopefully they're okay. And I have good news for them. You can text them and say if they want to fire up YouTube, they can go ahead and enjoy it from afar.
Also remind them to smash that like button.
If they're assuming they're all okay. Prokaryotes and eukaryotes. What's the diff? So you are a eukaryote. The karyo, like, so this is the root kary, K-A-R-Y, from the Greek karyon. Karyon is the Greek word for the kernel, or for lack of a better way to say it, the nugget, that kind of thing. So EU, anybody know what EU is the prefix translator of? EU? What's it?
I may be wrong about this. Lots of stuff.
Yeah. You know, I desperately want to say you're right. So let's leave it at that. True, authentic.
Okay.
True or authentic. So these things are the true kernel bearers, the true nugget things. So what is a karyon? What is a kernel in the context of this? And for this, we need to harken back to the days of Mr. Robert Hooke. Is anybody? He's one of my three favorite scientists in history.
I remember the name.
Yeah, well, you know him from chemistry. You know him from Hooke's law. If you ever taken chemistry, you may have heard of Hooke's laws about elasticity and things like that. That is the same Robert Hooke. Who is into history? Like a Western Civ situation. Anybody? Anybody? Who has heard of the city of London? Back when we were kids, it used to be called Londinium back when I was a child in the Roman times. Now it's just called London. And something simply amazing happened to London in 1666. It was the worst of times. It was the best thing ever. What is the bad thing that happened in 1666 in London? There's a fire. And most of London burned to the ground. Is this a bad thing? Is this a bad thing? It was a horrible thing. Many people died. It was an absolute catastrophe. Destructive beyond imagination in the world at the time. However, what your city being leveled to the ground in a fire like this, allows you to do is when rebuild and recover happens, you can make improvements. So, well, not to like paint over this, it was an absolute catastrophe, and like gazillions of people died. So it's like, there's no good to be like come of the thing, but. When there's that scale of destruction and there's the will to actually rebuild a city, you can make improvements, right? Because the city of London had been built on top of itself for 1,600 years, almost 1,700 years by that point. So, two people were put in charge of the rebuild. One was an architect, who specialized in churches with spirally spires. His name is Christopher Wren. You've heard of Christopher Wren? So all kinds of buildings all over London are Christopher Wren designed things, mostly the churches. So, but municipal buildings and all the other kind of stuff. However, where is Christopher Wren to build? So you need a city planner, a map maker, somebody who can actually sketch some things out and say, these are how wide the street should be. This is the angle on the gutters. This is the routes of the major thoroughfares and things like that. The city planner at the time was one Robert Hooke, who was the very first ever experimenter / researcher for the newly emerged Royal Society of London, right? The scientists that report to the Queen. And so Robert Hooke and Christopher Wren got together, laid out a new map. London built up today. And so even today, after all these years, ever since we did that, London is very easy to navigate and easy to drive around in, right? It's an absolute catastrophe to actually drive around. It works very, very well if you're in 1670 and riding a horse. Otherwise, it's a disaster. So they've not yet invented things like right angles at the time, right? So the streets are like, it goes all crookedy like that. It has 4 names that it goes through. It's like, what's going on here? So this street turns into that one. It's like, I get confused by Pickett turning into Blake right up here, you know. It's rare in Northern Virginia. At least Cambridge goes for 22 miles without a name change. London could take a clue. One of the other things that Robert Hooke did as a researcher, he also buddied up and got together with some of his friends who were also pretty interesting inventors of the scientific equipment. One in particular named Anton van Leeuwenhoek. Do we know who Anton van Leeuwenhoek was?
Sounds familiar.
He was a glass blower who found out that if he blew this glass in just the right way, you get these little round spheres that have optical properties. If you look through stuff through one of these things, the little bitty things all of a sudden look really, really big. He didn't invent the microscope, but he invented the microscopic lens. Right around the same time, Galileo was taking similar optically glass properties and putting them in a tube and saying, if I don't point it this way, but I point it that way, then I can see stuff that's really far away. In both cases, you're taking stuff that is really, really small and you make them really, really big. Right? So it's like the difference between Robert Hooke and Anton van Leeuwenhoek and Galileo was that Galileo was using his microscope and looking that way, and Leeuwenhoek and Robert Hooke were taking that equipment and looking that way, right? One was taking things that are far away and making them look close, and the other one was taking things that are really small and making them look big. You can sort of piece together in your head. In both cases, you're sort of doing the same thing, right? Little bitty thing, make it big so you can see it. Far away thing, looks little, make it big so you can see it. So
True cells, or figure out what's also.
yeah. So what Robert Hooke then did is like, I will turn my interest in this piece of equipment to the biological. So he took a lot of biological stuff. 2 of them that he's best known for is cork. So like, tree bark of the cork tree, he was able to look underneath it. And like amoeba, like the things that swim around in fresh water that you don't see, but they're there. So the next time you're in fresh water, imagine all the other things that you can't see that are in the water with you, including but not limited to brain-eating bacteria, all sorts of other, anyway. All delightful things that can give you a wonderful rash. If you go to some wonderful lakes in the eastern hemisphere, though, you can get like parasites, just like burrow across your skin or swim into your urethra and occupy space in your bladder. All kinds of wonderful things in the water.
Wasn't Newton in that squad too?
Giselle, I have to respect your raised hand.
I was gonna ask, what is it called, those like tiny organisms? I think it's in like Puerto Rico, in the water, you can like see the organisms in the nighttime when you like.
Like the photoluminescent ones?
Yes.
I know what you're talking about. Yeah.
That's what they're called, photoluminescent.
What the question is, what are they?
Yeah, I just,
I think they're photoluminescent,
yeah.
little microorganisms that live in the water in Puerto Rico. They come to the surface and once and they sort of glow in the, yeah, it's pretty neat. I don't know the specifics, but that is something they will do.
I was just trying to be
You
funny.
know, it's something they do.
So that-
And so Robert Hooke takes his piece of cork in this microscope that he was saying a microscopic device, and he looks at this thing and he says, wow, look at this cork. It's made up of all these little squares, much like the squares that monks will sort of limit themselves to or seclude themselves in monasteries. And what do monks refer to these structures as? Cells. As cells, right? So he says, I'll call, it's like naming a baby. I will call these things cells. And ever since, there we have it, right? So we refer to Robert Hooke not only as the designer of modern London, the city planner of modern London, the first scientist of the Royal Society, but also the very first cellular biologist, was Robert Hooke. So there's an interesting biographical aside. He has this hateful, vitriolic relationship for all of his life with Isaac Newton, for one big reason that Isaac Newton seems to be, by all accounts, the personality of a petulant child having a temper tantrum. Really bright, but not an easy guy to get along with. And there's like absolutely hated each other, so much so that upon Robert Hooke's death, Isaac Newton went around, collected every painting of Robert Hooke that he could find and had them burned. So there's like one painting of Robert Hooke left because Isaac Newton is an angry, petulant man.
He also spent most of his career, Newton did, like trying to convert lead into gold.
Yeah, he had some fringy side projects, so he's known for three
He's a
things,
pretty nutty dude.
right? Calculus, optics. I mean, he learned about optics by taking a nail and poking his eye with it, and like, well, I'm not kidding, and like, deforming his eye and watching how like light bends and things like that when you push against the lens of your eye. So it's like, maybe don't do that. Gravity, calculus, and optics is what, but he did all kinds of this other stuff that you would call, alchemaic, fringe kind of stuff too. He was an interesting and odd guy, but he had a lot of time on his hands. Why? Why did he have a lot of time on his hands? Because he was off living by himself. You're right, and he pieced out.
Technology.
He pieced out to the outskirts of town. He got out of London because there was a plague going on. So calculus was sort of Isaac Newton's pandemic project. So it's like, I started a podcast. I don't know what you did during the pandemic, but Isaac Newton's like, no, we've got a new form of mathematics. It's going to unlock the mystery of the universe. Why not? Or take a dog walking gig. One or the other.
I feel like Isaac Newton was just mentally ill.
There is some speculation that he might have been on the Asperger's kind of cloud a little bit. Yeah. That it was more than just bad tempered.
Yeah.
Imagine what it would be like to be have some autism or some neurological, neuroatypical.
Like 16 or whatever.
Neurodiversity in 1666 was not well known or appreciated or accommodated.
At the time, like, you're pretty bored, to be honest.
Yeah.
Like, what are you gonna do?
Well, I mean, it's not like he had a cell phone and he didn't make it when he transported back in time.
And it's hard to get them with books, you have to be rich. Like, what are you gonna do?
Yeah. I mean, they thought clean water was a novelty, so.
Yeah. So you gotta invent something.
I
There's so
agree.
many things to
That's why we call this the Age of Enlightenment. It's like, well, I'm bored stupid. Like, I need to invent
There's so
things
many
to do.
things invent.
I need to invent some things to do. So, thus, we have the first cell biologist. There is a copy of Robert Hooke's book on the micrographia, not like an original one, but like a copy of a billionth time, 11th printing in the Science Learning Center upstairs, kind of by my office. There's a copy of it up there. It's like you can buy it at a bookstore if you do that thing anymore. It has all his hand drawings and all that other kind of cool stuff that he made. I'm looking through his microscopic device, and his microscope is in a museum. His actual microscope is in a museum in Silver Spring, Maryland. I've seen it. It's like, believe it or not, they don't let people touch it. But they have a whole, the history of microscopes kind of exhibit at this museum. And it's like literally Robert Hooke's microscope is like sitting right there. That's nuts.
What's the museum called?
I don't know. You're Googling stuff. You can do it right now. Is it the Museum of Medical History or something like that? Might be one of those NIH associated things up there, kind of by Walter Reed.
Museum of Microscopy.
They're just like Google Robert Hooke's microscope or something like
That's
that.
what I did. I said, where's Robert Hooke's microscope?
Cool. This is about 10 years ago I went and saw it. I guess it's still there. I don't know. So once you develop this new biology and start seeing all this interesting stuff, you have to give names to stuff. So what they noticed is that with a lot of the stuff that they looked at, they saw this little pellety, kernely thing on the inside of all these cells. That as they carry on, they said, okay, these cells where we see this thing is called a eukaryote, right? Where we actually see, and of course, that little thing that we're looking at is the nucleus. It's the nucleus of the cell. There's a whole group of different kind of cells that don't have true kernels. They arose before the kernel. These are prokaryotes. Prokaryotes. There are 3 domains of hierarchy in this world. There are 6 kingdoms. 4 of them are here. 2 of them are here. Let's list. What's a good eukaryote kingdom? Animals. Well, my best friends are eukaryotes. What else?
Plants.
Plants. What else? Fungi. And the other one, right? What do we call those? We just call them, like, has this weird name. They just call them like, yeah, protistans or protists. They used to be called protoctistans. They've all received all kinds of weird name changes through time. Today we just call them protists. In the prokaryotes, we have 2 different kingdoms, including but not limited to. What's over here to think? Bacteria. And the other one that always comes in last. The archaeans. Archaea. Or archaea. Very neat things. No nucleus. They're doing cool stuff. We think of these things as fancy. We think of these things as dramatically simple. There are way more of these things on Earth than there are of these things on Earth. When I look at you and I see your beautiful, bright, shining, smiling faces, what I'm looking at is a collection of bacteria and dead skin cells. That's actually what my eyes are responding to. Yay. I love you all the same, right? So there currently is bacteria and fungi that are literally coating every surface that you're in contact with right now. And I think that rumor is true that your mattress weighs like 15 extra pounds than it used to just from all the dead skin cells and bacteria and stuff that live in it. The good news, Kat, who will never sleep on that mattress again, is that you're bacteria through and through. So, you know, your entire outside surface is covered in bacteria and fungal spores and all of that. So is your interior. So you have a rich and healthy bacterial colony that lives inside of your gut at any given time. Not just there until it does something bad, but you require it for continued healthy existence. So you live off of this bacterial colony that lives inside of you and you rely on it daily. I had a friend of mine, oh, you don't want to hear my personal stories, do
You can talk
you?
about,
I have a friend of mine, somebody just say yes, sorry, we can finish. A good friend of mine when I was in graduate school at Davis who got like a sinus infection or something like that. And took some antibiotics and reacted very poorly to them, and she essentially sterilized her entire gastrointestinal system. She lost about 80 pounds in about 3 months. It was just an absolute catastrophe, trying to get her gut biome reestablished and sort of normalized. Now it's easy. You just get a fecal transplant,
yeah.
right? Where you just take some poop from somebody else and surgically put it in your own gut. You like have a starter colony. You know, it just sort of grows, but this is before then. So it's like she's eating a lot of yogurt. She's taking a bunch of prebiotics and all this other kind of stuff. Really just trying to establish this. Where do you get your gut bacteria from, right? Ideally, your gut is inoculated through breastfeeding, right? That's one of the things that is such a good thing about breastfeeding, not normal breastfeeding as a baby, that's what it would be at the time. And that's where you essentially get your first, well, that's where you get your second inoculation of gut stuff. The first one comes a little earlier. When you're leaving your mother's vagina with your mouth open.
Okay.
This video is not made for children, right? But it's like, hey man, you're getting squeezed out of tube, you know, stuff's gonna get in, you know, it's like, yeah, that's where it comes from though. But it's super important though.
Like a
But
baby's getting extruded.
yeah, well, they are kind of. I mean, we were all extruded at one point or another. But you know, there are these like loose associations between whether you're a C-section or natural childbirth and like gut health and allergies and things like this, you know.
That explains a lot for me.
Yeah, so C-section, yeah. So it's like, you don't get that really early exposure to the environment, you know, in sort of the same ways. And your first exposure with inoculation in your gut is just like whatever's floating around in the air 20 years ago, not like this is an established colony that works well on the internal tubes and pipes of humans. And so it's better to inoculate yourself with that than just like whatever's come through the HVAC unit at the hospital on Gallows Road. Naomi.
Oh, my brother was a C-section baby and I wasn't. I think he is healthier, like overall, like less allergies, less
Interesting.
stomach issues.
Yeah, there's more to it than this, but
I
you
mean,
know,
yeah,
there's some
100%.
super loose associations. It's like, I don't know, it's better to be
Better to be,
natural seems to be the way to go. Better to be extruded than removed. Right.
yeah, he was removed.
So, but I mean, you got to do what you got to do. I mean,
I was a big jumper.
yeah, it's like you got to do what you got to do. So it's like it'll be fine. But now what they do, it's like if you're a C-section birth, they'll take a swab, you know, from mom, and they'll just like wipe it around inside of the mouth and things like that to get a starter culture cooking.
Wow.
Yeah.
Very informative.
Welcome to college. I don't know what to say. You need to learn these things. I don't believe they didn't teach you this stuff in 6th grade health class. So bacteria, they can be your friends, they can be your enemies. You know, we'll see how they go. Archaeans, we don't hear about these too often. These were probably, I don't know what Dr. Rasmussen says about this. These were probably the first organisms on Earth. If you saw them today, you know, 4 billion years ago, origin of life, you'd probably say it was an Archaean.
Yeah, he said, I don't remember. We learned about like
Miliae and
stuff.
yeah. So
I
if
can't remember.
you looked at like these very first primitive cells, you would probably call it an Archaean. So we have these notions that life emerged as something like clawing its way on the ocean, on the beach.
Yeah.
Not how life originated at all. Current thinking is probably a hydrothermal vent situation, you know, and in those environments, you're doing photosynthesis, you're reducing methane, you know, and sulfur compounds and things like that for fuel. And those would be methanogenic, which you would say is probably Archaean. Go for it.
So if the archaea are the first cells or first living things.
Let's say probably in front of that, just to not get,
How do,
I don't lose my
how
job.
do they go from not living to living?
ooh, the Darwinian threshold. You would be interested in how to create life, would you?
Maybe.
Fascinating.
Um,
They call it the Darwinian threshold. How do you cross the Darwinian threshold, and what requirements are there in place in order to actually do that? I asked you what you wanted, and then I kept talking ahead.
So since Archaea was, how do you pronounce it? Archaea?
I say Archaea, Archaea.
Okay.
It depends on how
Since
fancy
that
you
was
want
the
to
first
be.
organism, does that mean like all of the other ones derived from that one?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes. And they have strange traits of both. So they have circular DNA, like the bacteria does. So the DNA is in a circular arrangement, but it's also wrapped in protein histones, which is something that these things do. You know, so it's like these probably got started first, and then like bacteria kind of went off this way, and then the animals and plants and these things probably branched off of the Archaea, but this is like a way long time ago. Way a long time ago. This is pre-photosynthesis and things like this when these things are talking. But photosynthesis sort of came later, but neat stuff. The first 2 lectures in my Bio 102 class are the origin of life. So if you want to hear that conversation offered by my narrative, I would encourage you to enroll.
Open up today.
It did, it's up to like 7.
Yeah, I already registered.
Nice, look at Jessica. Get it while it's hot. It's going fast. Get it while it's hot. And if anybody fails, I'm doing a 101 next semester as well, too.
That's true.
I'd like to be seeing many of you in this class next week. So, yeah, prokaryotes, eukaryotes, nucleus, no nucleus. In Bio 102, we talk about how all these things are related to each other and all that kind of fun stuff. The nucleus is an organelle. It is a kind of organelle. When we think of organelles, and we'll do a little bit of a run through here in a little bit, we're talking about things like smooth ER, rough ER, Golgi, mitochondria, chloroplasts, vesicles, peroxisomes, lysosomes. What else? Am I missing any? I don't know. All the stuff you learn about in Bio 101, or you learn about in high school biology and things like that, organelles. So not organs, but organelles. So whereas you have organs that are made up of tissues and things like that within your body, and each of them does different things, the individual cell has organelles within them that are diagnosable and do particular and specific things, which are kind of fun. All right, so what does a cell do, and how does it relate to how it converts and collects energy, how it makes stuff, how it processes stuff, how stuff gets in, how stuff gets out, where proteins are constructed? All of this is about those organelles that exist inside of these cells, how they operate, and how all of this stuff interacts with each other. Too often, who has ever had a lecture about cells and cell anatomy where you talk about organelles and that kind of stuff? Anyone? The rest of you did, but I'm not going to ask you anything about it except for one softball question. How did it go and what do you remember? I guess that's two. Typically, when people think about this conversation, it's like, this is the rough ER, and this is what it does. This is the Golgi, and this is what it does. And this is the smooth ER, and this is what it does. There's not a worse way to talk about what a cell actually does than that. It's like riding on the tram through the zoo. On your left, the Golgi. This is where it's fun. On the right, rough ER. This is where that is, you know. On the left, smooth ER. Pay attention, you know, on your right, the Grand Canyon. So a lot of times this tour of the cell comes across as a tour of the cell. However, what we find when we start looking at these organelles and what they do is that all these parts are interacting with each other in some pretty interesting ways. Interesting ways that give you the properties of life. So the question about how and when and why and under what circumstances might life originate, it's about, okay, how do I get these reactions in place? You know, because like we talked about on day 1 or 2, you're made of the cheap stuff. You're made of the scum layer on the top of the periodic table. That stuff up there. It's not the stuff you're made of that make you fancy. It's the interactions of the stuff that makes you fancy. Remember that, Kat?
Yep.
Like, really? Remember that? You need to review? Perfect. Yeah, so your interactions, Kat, are so awesome that you are actually alive. It's fantastic. So those interactions happen within the cell because the cell is not just a convenience. The cell is the unit of life. And we call this organizational arrangement of things, with cells being the unit of life. We have this whole construct that we use to discuss that, which we refer to as cell theory. Cell theory. What cell theory is, Naomi, it's a collection of very simple, very straightforward, very clearly defined and articulate conditions or points or arguments that you can make. And although they seem super simple and super reasonable, they are essentially what the scouting report would look like if you were an intergalactic alien that came to Earth and had to report back what life on Earth is like to your overlords. So it's like if you were sent to another planet and it's like, hey, Jessica, go find out what life is like on this planet and take some notes and report back. What would you bring back? You know, so it's like, it's sort of like that. It's like cell theory is convenient. Yeah, it's also what cells do, but it's like, it is literally the template of life on Earth on how it operates. So it's like every living organism sort of exists within the framework of these kind of statements. Now that I've built them up so much, I hope I don't disappoint. But is that something we can see? The cell is the basic fundamental unit of life on Earth. True for all, 100%. That one is too. It's prettier in person than it is on the screen. Get a different one. All life is, what do I want to say? Composed of one or more cells. This is different than that. All right, this is a different statement than that is. This is like the cells make the unit of life on Earth. Great. All life on Earth is composed of one or more cells. So some of these things get fancy and do this whole multicellular thing. Like Sarah, for example. She's fancy. She's multicellular. She's complicated. She's a complicated woman. Nobody understands her. Right? Multi-cells. Cool. All good there. The strange strategies of multicellularity we'll cover in Bio 102 for no additional charge other than tuition. 3, I need to get another color because that seems to be what I'm doing. All cells are derived from pre-existing cells. That is point number 3. And I'm at the bottom of the page because there's only 3. But these are them, right? So it's like, this is what your report back to the mothership would look like if you said, go over there, take some basic notes on what life is like on this planet and say what you would say. This is what you would come back with. And it's like, these seem simple, these seem pretty straightforward, but it's like, these are powerfully important as a construct. These define life on Earth. These define life on Earth in the basic, most fundamental way. So the cell is the basic fundamental unit of life on Earth, which means a cell must contain and does contain all the basic properties of life. It must be reproducible. It must have metabolism. It must be able to make copies of it. It has to do all the basic life stuff on its own.
So if all cells are derived from pre-existing cells, how do the first cells come to existence? And how, if those are came into existence, can you be sure that it's not still happening today?
And that's one of the 2 butts of cell theory. It's like, yeah, but what about the first one? Right?
Yeah.
If you're so smart, right?
Yeah.
Another smart-assy, yeah, but kind of thing that I would say if I was a student in this class is, what about viruses? Are viruses alive?
Yeah.
You know, so it's like that challenges this tenet here, right? It undergoes natural selection. It's wrapped in a protein coat. It has reproducible information. The only thing, it doesn't metabolize on its own, and it requires the machinery of something else to help it out. But it's like, I don't know, they evolved pretty good. So it's like, does a virus count? Does a virus not count? I don't know. So it's like, what about viruses and what about the first one? So we come up with this really great argument on how to get out of the first cell conundrum, which is, yeah, except for the first one.
Do you think this could still be happening today? I mean,
But that's also what it still implies. It implies the answer is no, right? Saying this is true implies no, that life on Earth is not still originating. It was kind of a one-off thing and kind of one and done. However, there's all kinds of research coming out now that folks, you can actually engineer a packet of phospholipid-containing stuff that has both a rudimentary genome and the machinery in place to start reproducing on its own. So it's conceivable that, artificially means, anyway, it might be able to initiate new lineages that you would call cells that count as much as anything else would, So, all good questions. And so the captain of the mothership that you're reporting back to says, yeah, what about the first cells? And what about like viruses? This is woefully incomplete. And and then you say, well, if you don't like it, then maybe you should go down there and check it out and come up with your own damn rules. And they're like, you know what, we're good. Let's go get some tacos. It's like, cool. So this accounts for 99.99999% of history of the life on Earth and 99.99999% of all conditions and circumstances. There's a couple of things out there, though. The virus question is more of a conundrum than where the first one come from, because are viruses alive? That just sort of comes down to philosophy almost a little bit. It's like, how much do you need to act like a living thing to be a living thing, and is somebody's newest model Tesla a living organism or not? Because it sure seems like it has some properties of life to me, There's nothing in here about being carbon-based. There's nothing in here about being organic. There's nothing in here about macromolecules. There's none of that. It really is like these super simple statements like that. And so that's how you get life on Earth. That's how you get life on Earth. Cell theory. Questions so far? Or do we get them as we go? You guys are quiet today. Did I yell at you too much? Okay. You're like, yep. I yell at people.
Oh, yeah.
If you're gonna be loud, go out in the hallway, I ain't got time for your yapping. All right, next. When we do these biology classes like this, a lot of times in like Bio 101 and Bio 102 as well, they tend to be very human-centric, right? They're usually about like, how does a person work? And it's easy to like completely skip over what bacteria do just because it's like, yeah, they're super simple, it's bacteria. We want to know how your cat does it. And we can do that a little bit. I mean, we do want to make this a personal thing. Long story short, prokaryotes, super simple. DNA is in a loop. They don't have any of the fancy organelles. It's like there's a membrane and there's some genetic material that is sort of bundled up and shoved into the corner. There's not a nucleus in there. There's not organelles. It's just like a metabolic soup. All the reactions sort of doing what they're going to do. These are not organisms that are ever going to take over the world in any sort of big, dominant, meaningful way. They take over the world in very, very small niche ways, which are easy to forget and easy to not think about. So when you are this, all biology ultimately comes down to economics. That's how we started talking about investment strategy and Roth IRAs in my Bio 102 class, right? Bless you. If you're going to start an organization that's big and complicated, like Zara or something like that, you're going to have like departments. You need, payroll and HR and production and marketing and advertising and physical structure, plant, all this other kind of stuff. You'll need all these components in order to operate together for efficiency. When does a company that is small go to a company that's large enough that it can't just be everybody's doing a little bit of everything and contributing to where we actually have to have different departments? What is that? 20 employees, 30 employees? Amazon started with 2 people in a garage. They did not have payroll, accounting, HR. They were just 2 people doing everything they need to do on their own. When do companies get so big that they actually need to have dedicated, efficient compartments in which to do that work? Where it's like stuff is so complicated that you guys just focus on legal stuff. You guys just focusing on hiring people. And you guys just focus on firing people. You guys just focus on mergers and acquisitions. You guys supply chain, right? I don't know what the size of that is. It depends on the business. But that's essentially how we can view prokaryotes and eukaryotes. Now,
Have you watched Succession?
what is it?
Succession?
I have not. I've seen it on like advertised. I've not watched it. Is it good?
I've seen some of it. It's really funny.
Cool. I'll check it out. Check it
It's
out.
really funny for no reason.
Can you relate it to this class in some way?
Well, it's about business.
Oh, cool.
So
There you go.
I mean, you're talking about business. but-
Yeah, I am. I like business stuff.
Is it a series of shows or is it a movie?
It's a TV series.
Yeah.
I think I've seen it
I thought it was a
before.
movie.
Where are we finding this thing?
HBO Max.
Ah,
I think, yeah, it's like The Office, but it's not obviously funny, like there's no, it's just not funny for no reason.
people thought The Office was funny.
No, but it's not like that. It's like,
Edit this one before.
no, it's like different, it's, I don't know, it's just
Yeah, I'll check it out. I'll
Yeah.
check it out. I'll check it out.
funny,
Thank you,
not
Naomi.
funny.
Yeah, thank you. I appreciate it.
It's a good show.
So in order for small, simple businesses, organizations, firms, whatever it is, as they get larger, they have to start specializing in some stuff. And it's like, as we get larger, I'm gonna start specializing in stuff. But it's like, as you get larger, more complicated, you have to, or you will no longer be able to grow any larger than you are. You reach the limits of efficiency and functionality, and like you're kind of stopped there. That's where bacteria and archaeans are, right? They have no interest in growing any greater than a small mom and pop LLC out of Burke, so it's like, they're up and out of the garage, they're fine, they're extraordinarily well. However, if you think about what makes life on Earth possible, and I have said this before once or twice, you think like the top 7 reactions that are required for life on Earth to be possible, like at all in a fundamental way, bacteria invented all 7 of them. All of them. Things like photosynthesis, bacterially derived, or aerobic respiration, and the invention of ATP synthase and electron transfer chains. Totally bacterial. Here's one that will end life on Earth: nitrogen fixation. Being able to take atmospheric nitrogen and convert it into amines, NH3, in the soil. The only thing that can do that is like 7 species of bacteria. If those 7 species of bacteria crap out, life on Earth comes to a screeching and unglorified halt. Right? So it's like these little bitty nitrogen fixation. Who cares about that? It's like bacteria, if that stops, we're all dead. Fun? Question, right? So bacteria sort of, in their extraordinary diversity, have like made life on Earth possible for all the other stuff by like holding down the fort on these super fundamental reactions that are essentially the foundation of an ecosystem on Earth, which is kind of neat. So don't poop on the bacteria, but that's sort of what we do every day, right? So don't diss the bacteria. They're all kinds of good stuff. They also do strange things. Think about protistans or bacteria and things like that of the microscopic ilk. They can pass information back and forth from each other across species and not in reproductive ways. These little genetic packets called plasmids. Anybody heard of plasmids? So let's say you're a bacteria and you're being all fancy, and you develop this gene that counteracts an antibiotic. Okay? It's like, great, you now have antibiotic resistance. I'm a different species of bacteria hanging out over here. It's like, oh, I have serious FOMO. I really wish that I was resistant to bacteria as well. Can I have that? You'll say, sure. You'll make a copy of it and pass it over to me. So like everything in the vicinity of the thing that stumbles across resistance now has antibiotic resistance. So they pass packets of information about about like antibiotic resistance back and forth to each other, which sucks if you're trying to like prevent disease, because it's like just one bacteria has to figure it out, and the rest of them can inherit it through plasmid transfer. It's wild. Cat.
Is that how superbugs are formed?
Yeah.
Which-
Yeah. Yeah. So if you invent one, and you invent one, and I invent one. And Sarah's like, can I have one of those? Can I have one of those? Can there one of the, all of a sudden she's resistant against literally everything. Not because she invented anything, just because she knows how to ask. Can I have your resistance to Cipro? Can I have your penicillin resistance? Can I have your ampicillin resistance? It's like, yeah, sure. Pass it around. Which is not good for us, but great for the bacteria.
So then how do like COVID shots work? Because they do they prevent like the plasmid communication?
That is a virus, not a bacteria. That is a virus, not a bacteria. It works by synthesizing the mRNA and Pfizer ones anyway, synthesizing the a part of the protein spike, but it's not the spike itself, it's the messenger RNA that codes into the spike, and you get injected with the messenger RNA. Your cells bring it in, start duplicating it, so you start throwing out protein spikes into your bloodstream, and it hits your thymus and your immune system, and it starts making antibodies to it. So you now have a predetermined immunological response to the protein spikes. So if you ever encounter the real thing by encountering the virus, your immune system already recognizes that spike, and it's like, cool, attack that thing. Yes, which is kind of cool. It's extraordinary technology. It's extraordinary technology. It really is. Back in the day, you had to actually grow the virus, and like break it, tear it apart, get injected with it. So it was very determinate based on how quickly you could synthesize and grow the virus itself, culture it. You don't have to culture it now. You just need a RNA synthesizer vat with lipids and the genome of the spike protein, making me sound a little more simple than it is. And you can rock it. You can rock it. Indeed. So I think what the Army is doing, they're trying to make an all coronavirus vaccine that works against all of them, not just COVID. Because there's like, 6 or 7 that can give you, or like there's 7 different kinds, and like 4 of them can give you an illness or something like that. And they're targeting something that is not the spike protein on them. It's some other part of the virus that is more generic to all of them. But it's the same sort of thing. That's supposed to work pretty well pretty soon, which is cool.
Will it be like a yearly vaccine that they're working on, or will it be like a one-time every 7 years?
Well, so far it seems like these things are kind of annual. I'm due. I'll probably get mine this weekend or next weekend. My second booster. 50. You say that. I had 104.5 fever the first time.
Well, you're eligible for, that makes you less likely to go to the hospital if you get it.
Yeah, I know. So I will absolutely get it because it's like, as Sting said, I just don't really want to die just yet.
So are diseases harder to cure than viruses? Is that why like it was?
Not necessarily.
Because like people, there was some controversy about like the vaccine because they came up with that so quickly, but like the cure for cancer, like I don't think.
Well, here's a fun check down where you can think about this. In human history, so it's like thinking about these like bacteria, viruses, like these bacteria and viruses and things, there's nothing here, right? Bacteria, viruses, eukaryotes, and all that other kind of stuff, right? What malady, if you want to think about them generically that way, is responsible for more deaths than anything else in human history? And it's probably a eukaryote. It's probably a mosquito-borne parasite, like malaria or something like that. Probably, right? Number 2 would be,
Isn't it like tuberculosis?
yeah, like tuberculosis, I think, is number 2. Number 3, you get into you think about the Black Death. It was really sort of a flash in the pan a couple of times. It really didn't. It's not something that, but
Doxycycline came on the scene.
yeah, tuberculosis is bacteria, right? Black Death is bacteria. It's like the bad viruses in human history, they tend to, like, you think about Ebola and something like that, it'll kill your ass. It's got a 50% mortality rate. It's really hard to get, and it just sort of pops up, and then it's like, it sort of goes, it's not easy to get. It's super fragile, so it's like,
It kills too fast, isn't it?
it does, it kills too fast. Yeah, it's hard to transmit, it kills too fast. So it's like, that's great if you want to be dangerous, but you're never going to actually get anywhere in this world like this.
Gotta play the long games.
Like influenza, syphilis.
Yeah, influenza. Measles,
Measles.
smallpox.
Syphilis is an STD.
Yeah, stuff like that. Stuff like that. But it's like the deadliest. It's probably like malaria or something like that, mosquito-borne
Yeah.
stuff.
Something that's high. Spreading. These are
So much for not to say.
So it's like when I limit that to viruses, I'm left with like smallpox or measles, like smallpox or something like that. COVID hits the sweet spot. If there is something that you could say about that, it's like, it's super transmittable and it can kill you, but not so much that it kills you before you're able to spread it around. And it has this little, it comes with a kicker, which is, it's about 20% of the who carry it and spread it don't even know that you have it though. So it's kind of like the ghost carrier kind of thing going on too. So if you wanted to engineer a virus that is going to be a global pandemic, COVID is probably what you would come up with.
Best year.
You know, it's like it's deadly, but not that deadly, and it's super spreadable. You know, so it's like it just barely doesn't make you sick enough that it makes you stay home when you should. So it's like it's kind of really hit the sweet spot of the most efficient way to be a pandemic. And COVID pretty much hit it right on the nose with it. So. There is a TV show on Netflix. I think it's Netflix, and I think it's called. Is it Explained? Explained?
Yeah, it's like a series.
There's like these 20, 25-minute little shorts. I think I'm talking about the right thing. It might be thinking about a different one. I'll find this out. But it was on, but there was an episode when it really first came out on like epidemiology of pandemics or something like that. And it came out like November 2019. And it's like, the next pandemic is going to look like this. It's going to come from here. This is how we're going to fight it and everything. And it was just like COVID-19 to the T down the list, right? So we could never have predicted this. Yeah, I don't know. Bill Gates was doing it for the last 10 years. He was working on this. I Giselle, great question. I want to counter this sort of depressing conversation by saying fungal bacteria, there are amazing things that come out of it, like booze, you know, and bread and gut biome
And
and
anthrax.
what?
And anthrax.
And anthrax. Well, maybe that's a great thing.
He said fungal bacteria.
Yeah, I mean, all kinds of great stuff comes out of bacteria. They make life on Earth possible, yet sometimes they give us a rash. I mean, what more can sort of be said by any of this? And we owe our lives to fungi and bacteria and things like that. Why do we have a relationship with cats? To how do we not get cholera in the Middle Ages? All of these things can be attributed to fungi and what they do. And bacteria, well, we're stuck with them, literally. So reconcile your relationship with them. And we'll get on to it. So microbiology and microbes. So on Wednesday, we'll do the tour of the cell, but in a way where there's a lot of arrows on it. And this goes from here. Which way does information go? So the problem here is this, if you want to call it that. If I draw a picture, not bad, of a cell, we have all this stuff out here, which is the environment. And on the inside, we have the nucleus with genetic code. With me?
What is that? I'm sorry, what is that? It's not the same.
Environment. This is cell membrane. This is nucleus. This is DNA. So what a cell represents is this. You get this from mom and pop, right?
Mhm.
Yes? You get all of these organelles that exist within this cell exclusively from mom. You get mom's Golgi, you get mom's rough ER, you get mom's smoothie ER, you get all mom's stuff. Because she's the one that lays the egg. Dad showed up for 5 minutes with a six-pack of, you know, like all dad contributed was the other half of this. All of this stuff is maternally derived, right? Including mitochondria and things like that. So your DNA is trying to make all these reactions happen and keep this thing alive, correct? Making proteins, all that other kind of stuff. The environment varies. The environment is like pushing in on this thing with weather and resources and rain and sun and all this other kind of stuff. So what the cell sort of represents, much like stars represent toxic relationships between nuclear fusion and gravity, a cell sort of represents a toxic relationship between the environment pushing in and the genome pushing out. So where these two things hit and collide is the cell membrane. That is also where life ends and the environment begins. So the cell membrane cannot be understated in what it actually represents as a thing. With me? With me, right? So your genome is like pushing out on the environment is like pushing in on it, and what your life is like it's like a truce that's been formed between the two oppositional forces kind of interacting and pushing with each other. The more harmony you can live with in that relationship between the environment and your DNA, the better, the better. But there it is. So it's like my body has needs, and my body's getting a little bit hungry because all I eat anymore is chicken, broccoli, and black beans. It's the
No chips.
4-hour body. I'm no carb.
Yeah.
No carb. Lost 9 pounds in the last 2 weeks, though.
Yes.
For the first time this morning, my wife said, "He's looking a little thinner." Thank you. But I'm hungry, right? And I'm feeling that because there's the cellular information. And I need resources. I need fuel. I need to make some ATP to make my reactions happen. My environment's like, yeah, but there's no food in here, right? So what my body made of these cells represents is like, okay, so I need legs, and I need muscles, and I need a stomach, and I need teeth, and I need to have recognition for what is edible and what is not, right? So it's like I'm living in this tension between what these cells need in order to continue on in this existence and what the environment does and provides and how it changes and how it stays the same, right? And you're just sort of interacting with it. And why then, you might ask, is your life so complicated? Why is your life so complicated? You talked about this in high school, right? Did you talk about this, why your life is so complicated?
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
Giselle, do you want to know? Sure. Okay, so who feels like they're complex on the inside? A lot of complicated stuff happens inside of it. And we're not just talking about the physical stuff, mental, emotional, psychological, whatever. All kinds of complicated stuff goes on inside. If you're not raising your hand, you either 1, lying, or 2, not paying attention, or 3, just being ornery and obstinate and saying, I don't have to raise my hand just because you told me to raise your hand. What of those 3, right? Cool. So with all of this massive amount of complexity and information and giving you all the feels and all the sensations and all the needs and requirements and habits and reflexes and everything going on inside, ultimately you can only do 2 things about any of it. You can either make words come out of your face, or you can move a body part. That's it. So the struggle of this life is with the shocking amount of complexity, I'm very limited in how I can actually respond to it. It's either got to be my body does something or words come out of my face. And to be honest, words coming out of my face is part of my body doing something. But I'm splitting hairs to make it sound like you don't have any options at all. Because who wants that?
I mean, yeah, the mandible is technically a body part.
Yeah, so that's what I'm saying. It's like technically it's one thing, but I don't want to like leave you with no hope at all. Right? And so it's like, for all the stuff that you have to do and all the interactions and all the thoughts and all the fancy, you can really only do a couple of things. No wonder it feels a little constraining. No wonder it feels like you don't have any options, because you really don't have that many options. You know, so we just want to go with grace and we do our best and we accept love from others. I love you all and everything is going to be okay. Even though we really can't do too much about this world, we can certainly do it together. We can certainly do it together. And if you want to do it together on Mondays and Wednesdays from 9:35 to 10:55 next semester, register in my Bio 102 class, right? Or don't and get an F and we'll take it in 101. Questions, thoughts, comments, concerns? If you're not concerned by something I said today, then you weren't paying attention. So Wednesday, what does a cell look like, and how do all these organelles interact with each other? That's what we're doing. So make sure you hydrate, get plenty of sleep, Jessica. Eat good food. Don't eat too many carbs. Get a good night's sleep. I'll see you guys on Wednesday. I will not see you in lab. I'll see you at 2:20 on Wednesday. Somebody wake her up.
So no lab on Wednesday?
Correct.
Okay, I missed that.
Are we gonna have, are we gonna talk about the phases? Are we gonna talk about different cell phases?
Yes. Yeah. My, anaphase, prophase, all that. Yeah. We'll get into that.
I want to take a picture of
I have a
my
question.
What's up, Sarah?
Okay, so kind of personal, I've been depressed.
All right,
for
see ya.
like a month. Oh, well.
Let me end the stream. Okay, go ahead.
Wait, I'll